Hi, everyone. Let me apologize first for the broadcast problems with the original lesson from yesterday. Recorded for an hour and a half, but only seemed to broadcast for 40 minutes. So I'm going to try to capture the second half of yesterday's class. I'm at home, not at school, and of course, I don't have the other students in the class in front of me. So I think what was captured pretty well during the first half of the class was the attributes of a stage manager, and you got an email with a photograph of those items that had been written on a whiteboard. And that pretty much took up the first 45 minutes of the class. So now I want to talk about the plots and lists that were discussed in chapter 3 of the book. So we will go through that. The performance analysis that you're working on now on whatever section of Swan Lake you selected will allow you to create plots for costumes, for props, for scene character breakdowns, as well as French scene breakdowns. What I'm expecting for you to include in your final project is the costume breakdown, the prop breakdown, and the scene character breakdown for your section of Swan Lake that you're working on. You should be able to just reformat the performance analysis to give you those 3 plots, which I will try to explain. So I'm gonna, the plots and lists that I'm using are posted on Moodle, but I will try to show you what those samples are today so that you can, will understand what exactly we are doing. Excuse me for 1 second. I thought I had these all here in the right order, but I don't. Okay. So one of the benefits of doing the performance analysis, which you all are working on, is that it will not only lend itself to the plots and lists that I just mentioned, but you will be able to use it to create preset lists, scene shift forms, quick change room setups, dressing room setups, etc. And some of those documents you will be working on at a later date, particularly the preset lists and the scene shift list. So it's a very valuable tool. Now, this performance analysis that I've asked you to do is something pretty much that I've created. If you actually mentioned it to somebody else, they probably wouldn't know what you were talking about. So this, and the reason that nobody knows what we talk about is this analysis is generally done prior to the beginning of rehearsal, and then it's upgraded by the stage manager during the rehearsal. But obviously we don't have access to the pre-production meetings for Swan Lake or the rehearsals for Swan Lake. So you are creating your spreadsheet from the actual performance. So you are creating an analysis of the final product as opposed to creating a spreadsheet initially that is then upgraded as you move through rehearsals to the final product. Once again, if you have any questions about this, I know it can be difficult to do this without being able to ask questions. So please email me or call me if you have specific questions on creating the performance analysis or the other documents. So first of all, I want to show you an example of a costume plot. And here is the version of costume plot, and I have posted this to Moodle. I hope you can see it here. There's a little bit of a reflection going on. In any case, a costume plot lists the scenes the characters in those scenes and the costumes that they wear in those scenes. One thing that's unusual about what we're doing is we have these very large scenes that Matthew Bourne assigned to Swan Lake. I think there's somewhere between 7 and 9 scenes in the entire ballet. But then you're also creating these small scenes that you're using time signatures for each little scene in between. And so you're actually capturing who is in each one of the scenes and what they're wearing. So all you would actually need to do is reformat that spreadsheet by character, and you will get a list of the characters in those scenes and what costumes they wore in those scenes. So the example I'm showing you here is slightly different than what you will need to do for your final project. So the second list is the prop list, and you actually have created that in your production analysis because you have a list in order of all the props used in the scene. A prop master could take that list and expand it to include more detail of what exactly the prop is, what it looks like, how big it is, the nature of the prop. And sometimes they expand their list even more to include the source of that prop. Is it borrowed? Is it rented? Is it made especially for that production? That is not something I'm asking you to do. I'm just asking you to make a prop list from your production analysis. So the prop list would literally be just that column that you have listed as props. The third thing is a scene character breakdown. Now here is the sample that I have posted to Moodle. This is one way of doing it. You are also going to use your performance analysis to create the scene character breakdown, and you already should have that. I believe it would just be the first 2 columns of the document you're creating. You have the scenes going one side, down the side, the scene, and the time signatures designating all those smaller scenes within the big scene. And then the next column, I believe, is the list of characters. So a scene character breakdown for your section of Swan Lake, all you would literally do is hide the rest of the columns, and we would just see the first 2 columns, and that's a scene character breakdown. It's very important to have a scene character breakdown so that when the stage manager and the choreographer are determining what is going to be rehearsed, they have the list of who's in which scene, so they can call just the people who are needed for those scenes, so people aren't sitting around. On a professional level, this becomes extremely important because people in unions can only work a set number of hours. So you don't want to call people who are not actually involved with the rehearsal, because they'll be sitting around and you'll be paying for them to be there, but they wouldn't be doing any work. So the scene character breakdown is extremely helpful when the stage manager and the choreographer are creating the rehearsal schedule. Something that we will talk about more on Monday after we've read chapter 4, which is all about schedules, and we will talk about schedules in more detail at that time on Monday. The next plot or list that I posted to Moodle is a French scene breakdown. Now, I'm not requiring you to do this as part of your final project, but the fact is you have already created a French scene breakdown. Just a reminder, a French scene breakdown is based on the scenes are determined by the entrance or exit of any character in a scene. So every time somebody enters or exits, that becomes a new scene. And it's an extremely important document for the costume designer who's dealing with what are they wearing in these scenes, and do they have enough time to make the change that is needed? And if so, how is it going to work? Are we going to need to do a quick change in the booth, or does the actor dancer have time to go back to the dressing room to make that quick change? So a lot of times a costume designer creates their own French scene, but in this case, we're just looking at it. I'm not asking you to do it. It just becomes an extremely important document for the costume designer. So all of those documents you can create from the performance analysis that you've done. So to reiterate, I'm not asking you to do a French scene breakdown, just a costume breakdown, a prop list, and a scene character breakdown on the section of Swan Lake that you have actually analyzed. So these next two plots or lists are items that you cannot do from your analysis from Swan Lake. That would be what they call the light plot, but I'm hesitant to use that vocabulary because light plot means something so specifically in the world of lighting that is an actual diagram of the entire lighting equipment and the lighting positions, etc., which we will not go into in this class. So it's more a list of the light cues. So I like to use the word list and not plot when it comes to lighting. So I've also posted a sample of a light list or a light cue list on Moodle. You can actually use this sample and literally create your own light cue list from that sample. All you would have to do is clear the contents here and create your own light cues. So I'm going to ask you to do 10 light cues. You could take maybe one of the pieces that you've choreographed and use that as light cues. So what I want you to include is the number of the cue, and you probably would start with light cue 1. You can disregard this column that says sound cue. So you're putting in the number of the cue. Then you are putting in this column that says cue when the cue is called, when the stage manager would actually call that light cue or would tell the light board operator to take that light cue based on music or action in the dance or something else. But that's generally the two places that cues are designed from: movement on stage, possibly the entrance or exit of a dancer, or music. In something like a ballet, I think it's probably would be more based on particular systems and measures in a score is often what the stage manager would use. In your case, I'm just asking you to pick the cue of when that cue would take place. Then you're going to, in this what column, describe what happens in the cue, like blue wash, downstage front light, and red top light. That could be a description of a light cue. And then in this column, it says count. That is the duration of the cue. How long does it take that cue to actually complete on stage? So in this first column, and this is from a dance concert that was done last spring. So this starts with actually light cue 97. The cue is actually a follow, which I want you to disregard for a second. Actually, I think it'll make it easier if I use the second cue here, cue 98. So its cue number is 98. The stage manager calls the cue when all the dancers move to stage right. What happens in the cue is all the stage right side light goes out, and it takes 2 seconds for that light cue to complete. So I'm asking you to do 10 of those cues. If you have questions, once again, email me or phone me. Just use this template to do your 10 light cues. You can disregard this thing that says mid-color up here. Just put whatever piece you're doing. If it's your piece you're doing, say the choreographer is Bella, the name of the piece is Bananas, and then start writing your cues as I've just described them. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is, excuse me, is the sound cue list. Give me 1 second. I thought I pulled it out of here, but apparently I didn't. Okay. So here is a copy of the document that's been posted to Moodle, excuse me, the sound plot. And so I would like you to do 5 sound cues. I'm going to ask you to use this form of numbering your cues. Sound cue A is when you would take a cue. AX is when that cue goes out. So similar to the lighting cue, you need to know the number or letter of the cue, what the name of the cue is. Where it says cue in, that is when the stage manager would call the cue to go. And then there's a description of the light cue. So in this example, sound cue A is the pre-show announcement. So the house is settled, we go to black, stage manager's ready to call sound cue A. She calls sound cue A go. The soundboard operator presses the bar on the cue lab, and the pre-show announcement comes up. That's what it's called in this case, and that's actually what the description of it as well. At the end of that cue, the stage manager calls sound cue AX, which is taking out the pre-show announcement. Yeah, so that would be called at the end of the pre-show announcement. Then their next cue is cue B, and I said it's Steve Reich drumming is the name of the cue. The stage manager knows to call the cue when the dancers are ready. Presumably they came on stage during a blackout, or else they're waiting in the wings, and the assistant stage manager has told the stage manager that the dancers are ready, and that's when the stage manager would call the cue. Here's the description of the cue, Steve Reich drumming. At the end of this cue, the stage manager would call light cue BX. They're calling it when the music is fading out. That's when they would be calling BX. And so the stage manager is using the end of the first section of the dance as their cue to call sound cue BX. So I hope that's clear. You need to do 5 of these cues. That would be A through E and AX to EX. Okay. So that is basically what we talked about during the second part of the class. I did want to bring to your attention 2 things that are included in chapter 3, which you read. First of all, it is an area lighting diagrams. As I've said before, often the stage manager does many roles, and when a company is on tour, the stage manager may be responsible for focusing the lights. In which case, the lighting designer has created an area lighting diagram so that the stage manager knows where to focus those lights when they go into whatever theater they're in. And you can see the diagram of that. Here's the diagram of areas for a play, but the same thing would apply for a dance piece. The other thing that is talked about in this chapter is cue lights and entrances and exits. So in general, cue lights are little lights that are set up generally off stage or in the orchestra pit or somewhere behind the scenery, so that the stage manager can cue a dancer to enter or a conductor to start playing. And they are used only when the actor or the dancer cannot actually see what's going on stage or hear what's going on stage. So they actually need a cue. If they can see what's going on stage, you don't really need to use a cue light. So in our case, it's only used when there is no way for a dancer waiting in the wings to know when to enter. They can't see a light change or hear a music change. The stage manager then needs to use the cue light system. A cue light system has both a warning and a go on it. And as I said, in theater, they're barely used. Dance, they're used a little bit more. In opera, they are used all the time. And we will talk about that later on when we talk about stage managing for the different performing arts forms. So the stage manager is there calling the show, and they're generally operating a console that's specially for cue lights. They may have a console that has up to 10 cue lights backstage, and they press a button that warns the dancer you're about to go on stage, and then they have another button to hit go, and the dancer knows to go on stage. It's pretty tricky for the stage manager, who's also calling the light cues and the sound cues and the scene shift cues, and they are also running this cue light console. So that's basically what the cue lights are. There, you have no requirements in terms of homework for your final project in regards to an area lighting diagram or creating a cue light plot. We were going to look at production books today, but we didn't actually do that. We will talk about that more when I show you about actually creating a script from a lighting cue list. So coming back to this form, which I showed you earlier, which is your lighting cue list. Generally, the lighting designer creates this. I created this. I handed it to the stage manager so they know when to call the cues. They added this column for sound cues so that they can more easily call the light and the sound cues from one script. So the lighting designer is creating the light cue list, and the stage manager does what they need to do to turn it into their actual script for calling a show. And as I say, we will go into that in more detail at a later date. So that's basically what I covered in the second part of the class. If you have any questions, contact me. For Monday, please go ahead and read chapter 4. And I will also be posting a number of different forms of schedules, which you will be required to do for your final project, but we will discuss all of those on Monday. So you should be able to find this broadcast as capital SM space 340 space capital L lesson 3 space part space 2, and I will send that to you. And hopefully this will work better than the first one that I sent you. So have a good weekend, and I will be sending you next class on Monday. Bye-bye.